Sometimes people encounter something in their lives that truly resonates with them. Something that stays with them, and maybe even starts to shape them. For me, that something is Final Fantasy. But what makes these games so special? In the hopes of answering that question, I created this video series to take an in-depth look at each of Final Fantasy's numbered installments. I'm the Thief of Crystals, and this is the magic of Final Fantasy. In a series that constantly seeks to reinvent its setting with each installment, it's only natural to see a lot of variety. Different takes on traditional fantasy, different takes on science fiction. There's an almost infinite amount of unique worlds to potentially explore with a new Final Fantasy game. Even when those worlds share similar flavors, the clear differences between the themes behind them and the messages held within their stories that come to shape the tone and atmosphere of their settings always serve to set each entry apart. But when you've gone from medieval taverns to the reaches of space and everywhere in between, where then do you focus your next chapter? When you're trying to keep things fresh and simultaneously engage a new audience along with your current fans, where do you turn? Where do you decide to weave this new story? For its 15th entry, Final Fantasy answered, reality. To offer something of a more personal take than I usually do, Final Fantasy XV is one of the most curiously conflicting experiences I've ever had with the series. Let's start at the very beginning. Around the time Final Fantasy XIII came to be, a trailer was shown for a sort of sister title, Final Fantasy XIII Versus, which, frankly, looked way cooler than 13 itself. It got everyone seriously excited. There was a lot of interest for a game with only one cinematic trailer. I remember constantly being on the lookout for scraps of news and rumours about the game, but it was all very hush-hush for a long while. Then, eventually, after a long silence, there was the sad news that the game had been cancelled, and it seemed like all that potential had gone out the window. That was, until Final Fantasy XV was announced and revealed to be a sort of resurrection of the game, now being directed under Tabata instead of Nomura. The reveal trailer we were shown was absolutely mind-blowing, and in that moment I was the most excited I'd been in years. Final Fantasy was back on the map, baby. This game was going to lead the series into another golden age. The hype leading up to this was absolutely unreal. Me and my friends were keeping up with every little detail and soaking in all the information we could find. The episode Duske demo was released and I had the time of my life. All these new features were amazing, the game looked beautiful, the real-time combat flowed really well, and I thoroughly enjoyed how important preparation seemed to be when it came to your success. Then came the Platinum demo, which wasn't as good, but it was something to whet my appetite leading up to the game's release. Along with all the additional stuff I dove into, like the short anime series, the Kingsglaive movie, hell, I even bought the wildly expensive Noctis figure alongside the game. Final Fantasy XV would be a deeply emotional tale of the Prince of Insomnia, Noctis, fighting back the evil Empire invading his home, unlocking the ancient power of the Astrals and reclaiming his throne, all while trying to reunite with his betrothed Luna. Alongside his three companions, they would encounter conflict, merriment, and heartbreak, all while travelling on an enthralling journey through a deeply atmospheric world. But when the game was finally released, and I threw myself into it, I was so excited I didn't notice the fact that what we got was absolutely nothing like what the reveal trailer showed. Seriously, take a look back at that first reveal trailer. You're looking at a different game. In fact, my absolute favourite trailer for how surreal and moody it was, the final cinematic trailer, hinted at far darker and more complex plot elements that simply weren't present in the final game. The marketing for this game was incredibly misleading and built us up for a return to form that 15 as a final product simply couldn't live up to. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For the most part of my very first playthrough, I was actually enjoying myself. Like, a lot. But I have to admit that part of this was to some degree willful ignorance. I tried to turn a blind eye to any little things that did go wrong because I needed this game to be the next big title for the series. I needed Final Fantasy to mean something again. But the further I got, the harder it became to ignore one big element of the game that was quickly beginning to feel more and more lackluster. The heart and soul of a Final Fantasy game, the story. If you actually take a step back and look at 15's story, not a whole lot actually happens. The entire premise is that while the Niflheim Empire invades his home, Noctis and his friends are on a journey to Altissia where he is set to marry his love interest Luna Freya. This goal remains the same for the whole first half of the game, and until then it's more or less just a sequence of roadblocks and minor diversions. Over the entire story there are only a handful of seriously pivotal events, almost all of which could have been handled far better. Instead of keeping the player constantly engaged, the plot feels as though it was spread thin over a number of inconsequential quests and story beats. And the big, emotional scenes it does have mostly suffer from a lack of build-up or not enough context to warrant an investment. It was at this point the flaws started to sink in. The incredibly easy and dull combat with almost no consequences due to the abundant and easily abused healing items. The fact that additional moves and skills in Noctis' repertoire accessible in the episode Duskade demo, which gave him far more control, variety, and tactical benefit, were removed in favour of link strikes, which all but strip away control and simply rely on you happening to attack alongside an ally. There's no real reason we couldn't have had both. I also don't really know why this game needed an open world. Final Fantasy X was a technically linear game that covered an entire pilgrimage, and a similar approach for 15 would have allowed it a lot more focus, which is something the game itself seems to prove, given that once it does take you out of that open world, it decides to dump most of its story on you. Aside from what I will say are some really solid dungeons, it feels like an unnecessary decision made for the sake of hopping on a trend. And in regards to the setting itself, this, in my opinion, has to be one of the weakest in the history of the series. 15 defines itself as a fantasy based on reality, which, while a neat idea in concept, kind of falls apart in the execution. What we're left with is a world with little identity of its own, and a number of fantasy tropes thrown in. The core of this story is largely based around cultures, royal politics, and ancient deities instead of the world itself, which would work better if the world was built with all of these themes in mind. Instead, it's simply a reflection of our own. It's distracting at best and flat out ridiculous at worst when your magical sword-wielding prince is talking with a guy who looks like someone you've probably walked past in real life. But, you know what? At the end of it all, I like Final Fantasy XV. It is a very flawed game in my opinion, and it hurts more knowing it came so close to being genuinely amazing. Just a few fixes here and there, and this would honestly be one of my favourite games in the series. But regardless of that perceived failure, I still enjoyed myself. Frankly, just talking about this game is making me want to go back and play it again. Even now there are parts of it I absolutely love. Though the combat lacks a fair amount of substance, maybe I've just been spoiled by DMC, and is largely based around holding a single button, there is certainly depth there that is best showcased in the DLC, and honestly the sheer visual spectacle of the fights alone is impressive. Summoning Astrals looks absolutely breathtaking, and the ability to switch between party members added a while after the game came out is definitely a welcome feature. The music is brilliant, the voice acting is fantastic, and I don't think any game in the series has captured a sense of genuine brotherhood as well as this one. Noctis, Prompto, Ignis, and Gladio are presented as little different than normal guys on a road trip, and as a result their numerous interactions with one another feel incredibly real. It helps that these characters have very well realized personalities and legitimate depth to them.
Got beef with my greens?
Prompto is the happiest, sweetest dork you'll ever meet, but the boy has some serious self-esteem issues and valid insecurities. Ignis is a sharp font of knowledge and might seem like a stick in the mud, but he's also immeasurably devoted to his friends, and it's made clear he'll go to any length to carry out the duty of protecting Noctis.
I swore an oath to stand with Noct and keep him safe. Whatever it takes, I will protect him.
Gladio is a laid-back, tough guy who fears the idea that he might not be strong enough to keep his friends safe, driving him to do whatever it takes to prove himself. Plus, he's honestly kind of a goof.
Then, if you take something already delicious like cup noodles and add in the finest, freshest ingredients, what do you get? The ultimate flavor experience.
The boys are all likable and relatable, and despite their clear differences, they all fit together well as a team. Seeing actual tension form between them later in the game until it all comes to a head, with a gut-wrenching reality check from Ignis, is absolutely heartbreaking. They all form the emotional core of the story, and it can be easy to place yourself in their shoes. Not to get too personal, but as someone who's been in a long-distance relationship for close to a decade now, I actually relate to Noctis a whole lot. It makes his and Luna's messages back and forth carry a little more emotional weight. I know how it is to constantly be far from the person you care for most, and I understand how meaningful even small interactions with them can be. I believe that's what the relationship between Noctis and Luna is supposed to represent. A distant connection that stays strong despite the mutual hardship of their circumstances. Unfortunately, I will say this doesn't entirely excuse how this is presented from a storytelling angle, or the lack of chemistry shown between the characters. Their relationship could have been explored a lot more than it was, and though various attempts are made, it's simply not enough to properly invest players in their plight. This whole story doesn't really pan out like you might expect. There are a number of factors involved and a number of things one could point to and place blame upon, but in the end, is that truly such a negative quality? If the intent was to tell a unique story that did things differently, 15 succeeded with flying colours. There's a perspective of storytelling that I thoroughly agree with, which is that no matter what the themes of your story might be, know how deep or complex the elements, or even how well it's told, if people don't connect to the characters involved, then it simply won't matter. And this is doubtlessly 15's biggest strength, its characters. Even beyond the main party, you have really cool characters like Core, Gentiana, Cindy, Iris, and I'll be real, I have a massive crush on Aranea.
Rise and shine, shortcake!
Not only that, but Arden is an absolutely brilliant villain and easily one of my favourite in the series. You can completely understand his motivation, and I love how he manages to be simultaneously smug, magnificent, and terrifying all at once. On that note, I also have mixed feelings about the DLC. I wholeheartedly believe that this game should never have been milked for as long as it was, but at the same time, despite most of the DLC episodes not really adding much of relative importance to the overall story, seeing the different perspectives and various events we missed throughout the standard game was actually a lot of fun for me, notably episode Prompto and Ignis. And I do think it's an actual crime we'll never get an episode Aranea. Rest in peace, you beautiful angel. The thing is, if you look at the various inspirations for this game, the themes involved, the deeper lore at play, and all the tidbits of information that shed light on a greater plot, you can see a game that is far richer than what we are immediately presented with. 15 suffers a great deal from this piecemeal approach, which you can even see in the various spin-offs and bonus material made for this game. I honestly believe that had all the time and effort that was put into making this stuff been focused solely upon the game itself, we would have gotten something far greater as a result. While I don't think any of this additional context is worthless, if you can't see the impact of this stuff when you're actually playing through the game, then I believe it hasn't been properly implemented. When something like a piece of concept art tells a story that you can directly call to mind from the game itself, that's a good sign. But when it tells a story that simply wasn't present in the game, that's a problem. Final Fantasy XV is a game that failed to become everything it could have, but it's also a game that managed to become something despite the odds being stacked against it. This game had an extremely troubled development history, with Tabata needing to start from scratch and only given a fairly short amount of time to have the game ready, which resulted in delays. It also seemed to suffer from a case of too many cooks, with Tabata's vision for the game clashing with the direction Nomura had left behind. This had been someone else's story, and that meant Tabata and his team wouldn't have full creative freedom over the plot and setting, despite the fact that they were attempting to do their own thing with these existing elements. 15 was born of a compromise, and that did nothing to help its chances. But when I reflect on this game, and the many hours I've sunk into it, I do see something of value there. I enjoyed my time with it. I loved the relaxing drives from place to place, the fun little mini games you can play, and all of the unique banter between the boys. I liked ogling the gorgeous meals Ignis can make, which never failed to make me really hungry. I liked looking through Prompto's photos to see if he got any good shots, or just flat out silly ones. Hell, I even liked Kenny the Crow. Though the fairly bland setting lacks personality, the characters are teeming with it. Looking at it like this, it feels as though the game was intended to focus more on the journey instead of the destination. Like the focus of the story was supposed to be based around the various situations the boys find themselves in, the people they meet, and the memories they make on their adventure together. Behind all of the missteps and negative outcomes, there's something genuine there, a trace of the heart and soul of the series. A game that is trying to live up to the name of Final Fantasy, or is at least trying to succeed at making its own mark. It's the culmination of countless brilliant ideas and concepts that simply deserved a better execution. Most of all, it's human, and that quality is easily its strongest. Final Fantasy XV may not put the series back on the map, but I do believe it puts it on the right road. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd be interested in seeing more content like this, please consider supporting me on Patreon. For updates and news about my channel, feel free to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. Links to both can be found in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.